Something that's always difficult to do is gauging how a player is going to perform when they get to a brand new team. And that's true season to season. Even when we've had a player that's been active for years, going to a new team is always difficult to gauge. Sometimes they find similar success, sometimes they have much more success. Christian Kirk is a great example of a player that was already moderately successful before he came over to Jacksonville. And then with Jacksonville, Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk obviously had a career year. Some players explode. Evan Ingram's a good example of a player that struggled to find footing in New York and in Jacksonville did very, very well. And now, before we get started, I do want to just give this brief aside. I want to know what you think. Statistically speaking, it would take for Calvin Ridley to have what we would consider to be a successful 2023 season. How many games do you want him to play in? How many receptions? How many yards? How many touchdowns? What are the minimum thresholds that you would look for to see Calvin Ridley as having a successful season? And go ahead and put that comment down now so you can compare what you came up with to what I came up with at the end of the video. Now, Ridley's case is even more difficult to project because Ridley hasn't played much football lately. All right? And we'll come back to that idea here in just a minute. So what I was thinking about was, what would it take for me to look at Calvin Ridley's 2023 season and say, that was successful. The Jaguars made a good move bringing Ridley on board. Because I think it's fair to say that pretty much all Jaguars fans, and I think most, even national pundits, think that Ridley was a good acquisition, a sneaky good one at the trade deadline last year. Now that he's been reinstated, I think a lot of people are expecting big things from Ridley, but the reality is we just won't know until he gets on the football field on a weekly basis. So, looking at the Jaguars' 2022 weapons, I think that's where we need to start when we think about what it's going to take for Ridley to be successful in 2023. Christian Kirk led the way, just over 1,100 receiving yards. Zay Jones, 823. Evan Ingram, who had a big second half of the year, 766. And then Marvin Jones Jr. was really clutch at different times, 529. So those are some pretty big numbers, but keep in mind with Jacksonville's offense, there's a lot of mouths to feed when it comes to distributing the ball around. There's a lot of playmakers on this team, and that graphic didn't even mention Travis Etienne, Jamal Agnew. Now Marvin Jones Jr. obviously is gone, but there's a lot of playmakers that the Jaguars have on offense, and I think it's also fair to say, though, we kind of expect the Jaguars offense to take another step forward. We expect them here in 2023, second year under Doug Peterson's system. I think we all expect the Jaguars offense to take a step forward when it comes to productivity, probably looking a lot more like the second half of last season and less like the first half of the season when they really struggled at times. So the next step to sort of figuring out where we should expect Ridley to fall is taking a look at Ridley's career stats. Where has he been in his career so far? So taking a look at that, back in 2018, Ridley, 64 receptions, 821 yards. 2019, 63 receptions, 866 yards. 2020 was Ridley's career year. This was the year that Ridley really looked like a top-tier wide receiver in the NFL. 90 receptions. 1,374 yards, 9 touchdown receptions. In 2021, he had some issues, only 5 games played, 31 receptions, 281 yards, just 2 touchdowns. And then, of course, 2022, he was suspended for the entirety of the season. So that gives us a little bit of a framework for what he can do. Obviously, he can be a top-tier receiver, but he hasn't played much lately. So I think it's important when we think about what it's going to take to sort of consider this a successful year for Calvin Ridley. Let's temper expectations a little bit for a couple of reasons. He hasn't played much football lately. He has a lot of weapons around him that are also going to be fed. He's going to be a big benefit to the other playmakers on the field. The other Jaguars receivers won't draw the same types of coverage they might have last year. Like Christian Kirk is going from being the number 1 receiver to likely the number 2 receiver. Zay Jones is possibly going to be an afterthought at times for other defenses as they try to cover Kirk and Ridley. So Ridley is going to be a big benefit to his teammates. Likewise, though, because there are other legitimate weapons, Ridley may benefit from the fact that the defense can't just abandon everyone else on the field. There's too many playmakers to just say we're going to put 2 on Ridley every single play. Someone is always going to have eyes on Ridley. Defenses can't do that with the Jaguars. There's too many weapons. So, the other thing to consider, without having played much, what kind of shape is he in? What kind of football shape is he in? All signs look like he's good, but we won't know till we know. So here are the minimums that I came up with for what I would look at and say, you know what? This was a successful first season for Calvin Ridley. Here's what I came up with. I would like to see him play in 14 games, at least. You know, the season's a long season. There's going to be times that players are banged up. It would be nice if Calvin Ridley could stay largely healthy and play in at least 14 games. But I think it's also fair to acknowledge receivers get banged up. They deal with lingering injuries. There are possibilities where he won't play every single game, but if he can stay mostly healthy, we're good there. 70 receptions. Now, you'll notice that's a touch down from his max season there when he was sort of a top-tier receiver in the NFL. 70 receptions to me is realistic because, again, lots of mouths to feed. There's a lot of other good players that are going to be catching footballs. So if he hits 70 receptions, I'm happy. 1,000 plus yards. And I would put an asterisk with this as well. I expect both him and Christian Kirk to have 1,000 plus yard seasons. I think that would be a highly successful year for the Jaguars if they had 2 1,000-yard receivers. I also think with this being, in my mind, a step forward year for this offense, second year again in Peterson's system, I think it's very realistic. But a 1,000-yard season would be really nice to see, and then 5+ touchdowns. If he can put all 4 of those things together, not 1, 2, or 3, all 4 of those things together, I look at that and I say that's a very good season. That's a good foundational starting point for Calvin Ridley and the Jacksonville Jaguars to then build off of. I think it's important to be realistic here. I don't think Calvin Ridley is going to come out and be one of the top 2 or 3 receivers in the NFL. There's too many good ones out there. There's too many elite receivers on teams that have fewer weapons. I don't think it's reasonable to compare Ridley's statistics to the statistics of a Justin Jefferson. It's just not realistic, and it's not going to happen. However, if he looks good on the field and he is being productive, and these are kind of the minimum thresholds that I'm looking for, I think it's a highly successful season. So those are just my thoughts on what it would take for Calvin Ridley to have a successful season in 2023. Obviously, I want to know your thoughts as well. Let me know in those comments down below. While you're down there, like, share, and subscribe, and YouTube will send you a few more videos from the channel for you to watch, and I will see all of you in the next one.